Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by the hosts of the AI Today podcast, Ron Schmelzer and Kathleen Walch. The AI Today podcast is produced by Cognilytica, and they talk about what's really happening in the world of AI, discuss emerging trends, technologies, and use cases from Cognilytica analysts and experts. Ron and Kathleen are both the managing partners and founders of Cognilytica, an AI research and advisory firm. Ron is also a South by Southwest Innovation Awards judge, founder and operator of the Tech Breakfast demo format events, and an expert in AI, machine learning, enterprise architecture, and more. Kathleen is a serial entrepreneur, a savvy marketer, an expert in AI and machine learning, and a tech industry connector. Ron, Kathleen, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Awesome. And to get things started, could you introduce yourselves and tell us more about your background?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Kathleen Walch. As you mentioned, I'm a managing partner at Cognilytica. Cognilytica is an AI-focused research advisory and education firm. We've been around since 2017. And before that, Ron and I had worked together at Tech Breakfast. So we've been working together for quite some time, since about 2014 or so. And Cognilytica really got started, and the AI Today podcast launched simultaneously with that. Because we found back in 2017, conversational systems were really becoming, popular. They started to come out on the market, and we said, all right, we started to hear a lot about that, and we said, let's get into it. So we actually started with conversational systems. Since then, have expanded to the full range of artificial intelligence, including what we call the 7 patterns of AI. So conversational falls into that. And the reason we came up with that was we found out when people were talking about AI, it's really an umbrella term, and it means so much to so many different people that we may not be talking about the same thing. So I may be talking about conversational systems. You may be talking about autonomous vehicles. Ron may be talking about sentiment analysis. And so it's all, falls under that general category of artificial intelligence, but means different things. So we came up with the 7 patterns as a way to shortcut that. And so at a high level, it's, predictive analytics, conversational patterns, recognition patterns, so making sense of unstructured data, hyper-personalization, treating each individual as an individual, goal-driven systems. So that's really around reinforcement learning, trying to find the most optimal path to your solution. And then we have autonomous systems as well. So the goal of autonomous systems is to remove the human from the loop. So this can be both physical systems or software systems as well. And then we have patterns and anomaly detection as well. But I'll let Ron introduce himself.
Yeah, great job. So I'm Ron Schmelzer, also co-host of the AI Today podcast and a managing partner as well at Cognilytica. And on the podcast, it's interesting. You'd think that after we're about 300 episodes into the podcast in 5 years of running the podcast, every week without fail, since the very beginning, and our listenership has grown and grown. And tens of thousands of downloads. I don't even know what our current download count is. A lot. And, one of the things that we have realized is that people are still looking for education. They're still looking for fundamental knowledge about AI. You'd think after all these years, AI is not new either. AI has been around for decades, since 1950s, right? And that's, I think, what's really powered, people still want information. They want education. They want knowledge. They want best practices. They like to hear from others. That's why podcasts are so popular. I think people like to sit and listen and hear, maybe on their commute, if they're still commuting these days. And I think that is what, keeps us going. And most recently, it's interesting. You'd think that the technology issues are the hard ones. The technology issues are the ones that need to be resolved, right? And there are some hard technology issues, but those aren't the hard problems. It's the people problems. Getting people to understand things, get to work together, solving process issues, which have to do with the way. And what we've realized really over the past couple of years, and since the evolution of the CPMAI, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly, is that it's project management that is highly critical to making AI projects a success, because the tools are great by some of the biggest and best companies, but the projects will fail not because of the technology, but because of people and process, like almost every single time. So, hey, the world of project management and the world of AI have a much higher overlap than people might have thought.
That's awesome. And just to tie it in with the AI Today podcast, can you tell us how did it originate? Like you mentioned, you've over 300 episodes today, and that's just fantastic. Was this like an area that you noticed you wanted to have a conversation to spark it among other people, help educate them, and just, really have an area where people can tune in and learn about all these different areas? As you said, it's not just the one area, it branches off into many different paths.
Yeah, we do have over 300 episodes, and we have never not found things to talk about. So it originated when Cognilytica originated because we wanted to find out what was really happening in AI today. I mean, people have different takes on things, but we said, what's really going on right now? What are organizations doing? How are people adopting these? What are best practices out there? So we started it as a way so that we could talk to others and we could learn in the industry what was going on. So it was a great way to start. And like I said, 5 years later, 300 plus episodes later, we still have not, um, you know, not had things to talk about, which is great. So that was originally how it started. And then why it keeps going is because we continue to learn. We have a really strong listenership, and they continue to tell us, what they would like to know, areas where there's lacking in the market, so that we can help fill those gaps with some of those basic education needs. And then I know Ron had alluded earlier about how there was a lack of best practices methodologies for actually doing AI right. So one of our most popular podcast series was our AI failure series, where a lot of people talk about, the positives, how you can succeed. Here's some good, use cases, success stories, but you can learn just as much, if not more, from project failures as you can from project successes. And people don't highlight that. So we said, this is incredibly important to do. So we have an entire podcast series about common reasons why AI projects fail and how you can avoid that. And so that has been some of our most popular podcasts to date.
Yeah, that actually really kicked it up a notch. I think what we found was that obviously, you want to interview people who are similar to your audience, because I think what we find is that the audience, identifies with like, oh, that person is like me. They're struggling like me. They have the same similar problems, maybe another industry, or maybe the company scale or size or culture is different. There always is. But like, there's some things you could find in commonalities, and that works out really well. And then when we started mixing in some of the educational stuff, we're actually now in the midst of recording this glossary series where it's literally just terms that people should know that maybe they think they know, but maybe they don't, or maybe there's some confusion or some disagreement. Even around the word artificial intelligence, it turns out there is no standard common definition for AI. You would think like, what? That's crazy, but there really isn't. Mainly because there's no definition of the word intelligence, which, we have a lot of different ideas for it, but like we don't actually have a common definition. So there's a lot of characteristics. So you're like, okay, well, what are the characteristics that you expect out of an intelligent system? And that's what we could talk about. And so it's kind of funny. And that glossary series turns out to be very long, and people will listen to that. So I think, in terms of the success of AI today, we found it's like, introducing some people that people may identify with, the education component, as Kathleen mentions, not always highlighting the good stuff, sometimes highlighting the bad stuff. And of course, our focus at AI Today has always been what's happening with AI today and what can you do with AI today, because there's lots of podcasts on the topic, and some of them focus on, say, the research or what's potentially happening in the future, or maybe some of them focus on sort of like the past and what's happened then, or maybe some tangential issues in terms of like, ethics or other, they're important. But we're like, well, what can you do about it today? So I think that's always been our little angle. I think probably why our podcast is called AI Today. There you go.
That's awesome. And has there ever been a podcast guest or a topic that you've had on the show that has really left you thinking like, wow, I wasn't expecting it to go this way, or, okay, that was insightful? Like, has there been anyone or any topics such as that just comes to mind for any of you?
So many. It depends on sort of like what you're interested in. So there's one, we've had some like influential thought leaders who have come on. Like actually one of our first podcasts was with James Barrett, who had this the big book on super intelligence, and it was like one of our very, very first podcasts. And it was kind of interesting because a lot of the folks who are like really involved in the space, AI is our final invention. Thank you. That's the name of the book by James Barrett. And, he's a very famous guy. He's a producer of some movie as well. And The truth of the matter is that there's this cycle, there's this component of AI that's not really based on sort of like the realities of where we are, because a lot of systems really are not that smart. And we tell people, it's like, have you talked to Siri lately or Alexa? These are not the smartest machines, but they're by the companies that are really working on the edge of innovation. So when things are good, as was told to us, is like, when you need to be scared of an AI system when it could tell a good joke. Then you should be scared, because it requires so much understanding of the world and context to really be able to tell a good joke. And so we realized that there's a whole aspect to AI that has to do with the way people feel about smart machines, whether they're scared, feelings of loss of privacy, feelings of like lack of control, of algorithms that are making decisions that impact their lives, even algorithms that are not AI, like possibly getting an account banned on an account. People are fearing these things right now, right? And there's actually reason to be concerned, because computers aren't that smart, and we may put a little too much trust into these systems than is truly warranted. So there's that. There's a lot of other guests. I'm thinking about some of the ones who told us was like, there's too much math in AI. But
Yeah.
I don't know, Kathleen, you want to talk more about?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we've had so many interviews, right? And podcasts in general. So some of the themes fall under, as Ron mentioned, kind of these AI luminaries in the space. So we had James Barrett on. We also had Colin Angle, who's the founder of iRobot. We had Ben Goertzel, who is with SingularityNet, and he also helped create SophiaBot. So it's interesting to get their perspectives on things and how they see things in the industry. Then we've also had a lot of implementers on. So these are folks who are putting AI into practice in both the government and private sector. So that's been interesting to see. And they've been, from governments all over the world. We had the chief data officer of the Scottish government. We've had many people from the United States on. We had a lady from Oslo, Norway. So it's really nice to get, that kind of global perspective. We've had folks from Australia as well, with how it's being implemented across the world. And there's been some common themes there. Everybody has the same struggles. Ron had mentioned earlier, it's nice to talk about use cases, because sometimes you talk to people and they're like, well, my use case is so unique and this is so specific exactly to my industry and my problem. And we're like, why don't you just step back a little and look at this from a different lens, because it's probably not unique and you can learn from others. And so those have been really nice to highlight and showcase when we've had listeners come to us and say, thank you so much for this podcast, because it's really opened my eyes. This is the exact same problem that I have. It just happened to be in a different industry. And what we found is that there's not a lot of, crosstalk, and people are not collaborating in these types of ways. So that's been something wonderful about the podcast. And then one of our most favorite series in particular, I know it was at least my favorite, I don't want to speak for Ron, was our AI failures, because we're able to say, this is where common reasons we've seen AI projects fail. Let's explain it to you. And then don't make the same mistake, because you shouldn't have to. These are around data quality issues, data quantity issues. What is your ROI on a project? At Cognilytica, we're advocates of best practices, methodologies. So in particular, the cognitive project management for AI, CPM-AI methodology. Phase 1 is business understanding. That means make sure you're actually solving a real business problem. You would be surprised at how many people jump into projects and they're like, well, we don't really know what our ROI is going to be. We don't really know what our problem is that we're solving. But I was told that we should do AI, or AI is cool, so let's move ahead. And we're like, okay. And then, $5 million later, you wonder why your project fails. So yeah.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that, because what made the failure series work for us is like, we didn't talk about it sort of like in theory or like as like a general learnings, but look, we actually did the rip from the headlines. And so we talk about, Walmart canceled this major $1 million shelf scanning robot that they had invested all this time in. So we talk about that. Amazon had to pull out this HR system, the AI system they're using for HR, and they got into all sorts of trouble. We talk about the fact that, Uber had these autonomous vehicles and actually killed someone. So that's actually kind of a problem. problem, right? So we talk about that, and we talk about, and so we go like, yeah, this company did this, and these are not small companies; these are big companies making big mistakes. Their failures are costing millions of dollars in personal lives, and there's like the Dutch government had used this algorithm for benefits that was had some inherent bias issues in terms of the data was bad, so database bias issues, and they had to pull that back. So we go, you don't want to be in the headlines for the wrong reason. So that really helps. That really helps. So we can go on and on and on about this, but I think it's really great. There's lots of insight to be learned from people that hopefully are experiencing the problems before you have to experience them yourself.
Absolutely. And as you said before, like not a lot of people actually talk about the failures in AI with their projects and that, but I find you would learn more from failing than always succeeding, because there's always that element of, for the next project that when you did X, not to do Y instead. And it's very beneficial. And there is that overlap with the AI and project management, and it's coming more evident in the coming years of how it's used, in the applications of software and that. But can you tell us some lessons maybe you've learned with the overlap of AI and project management?
Yeah, I think a good place to start is that, as we mentioned, that AI, the one thing that people may or may not realize about AI projects is they're not really about application development. They're really about data, because AI derives all of its ability from the ability to learn from data and to create generalizations from data and to create predictions and do all the things that we talk about. Every single pattern Kathleen mentioned about having a conversation or doing recognition requires that the system be trained to do that sort of thing. And that's all because of data. And it turns out that data management issues are some of the harder problems, and not in terms of the technology, but like a lot of the data is not in good quality. We don't have enough of it. It needs to be augmented. Someone needs to go in there and add all this sort of stuff: data ownership, data privacy, data security, data governance. As we start bringing these things up, you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of problems. And if the success and failure of your AI system depends entirely on that data, it's the old garbage in is garbage out, which is 100% the rule for AI, then your AI systems will fail. So what we realized, that there was a methodology in this case, not a generic project management methodology, a methodology specifically for doing data projects called CRISP-DM, the Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining, which has been around since the late 1990s, but hadn't been developed for years. And what we did is that we brought in new iterative and agile styles of project management, combined that with, of course, the new requirements for AI and machine learning. And that's what brought about CPMAI, the Cognitive Project Management for AI, which was put into place about when Cognilytica started in 2017, first with some banks, some really big banks, and then it evolved to some large government agencies. And now there are thousands of people and tons of organizations. We have like this whole logo pile that you can take a look at, from Coca-Cola to Rio Tinto to, all these big banks and whatever. It's a methodology that they're using for AI project success, but it's mostly about doing things in the right order. So maybe Kathleen, you can chime in on that process and project management methodology.
Yeah. So what we found, I said CPMAI starts with business understanding. So project managers understand methodology. And what we also have found is that in order to successfully run AI projects and make sure that you're running them the same predictable way every time, doing it in the right order, you need a methodology to follow. So that's, kind of where this overlap of AI and project managers comes into play, and how CPMAI fits so nicely into it, because there's methodologies that you need to follow, but they're data centric. And so when you can do that, then you're doing it in a repeatable way. And what we found also, as Ron mentioned, so it's not like software application. So you're not going to want to apply, just agile methodologies for this. You need to enhance that as well. But starting with, using some of those terms, and also starting with that kind of base methodology, we found really helps with success and helps project managers and different folks on the team understand things better.
That's fantastic. And to just touch on to that, is there any AI best practices that you find yourselves would be best implemented into this area? or have you any experience of which would be, in your opinion, the best practices?
Yeah, that's the other great thing. You want to borrow best practices that have proven to work from other approaches that are other industries. You don't want to create something from scratch. And I think that's one of the things we learned is that, as you're putting together CPMAI, bringing in more of the agile methodologies and other methodologies that have already addressed some of the aspects of just generic project management, but making them thinking about them from a data-centric perspective really works. So what we found was that you have to address the data issues early. So as Kathleen mentioned, phase one in this methodology is business understanding. Phase two is data understanding, which means you need to understand what data is needed, what data do you have, where are the sources of data, what's the quality of that data, issues of privacy, security, governance, all that sort of stuff. You can't move forward without that. There's this thing called the AI go, no go. It's like these 9 traffic lights. They all need to be green before you can go, anywhere. Otherwise, you are going into dangerous territory, right? And then after data understanding, the third phase is data preparation. So you actually start building what they call these pipelines, where you start dealing with trying to get the data to where it needs to be in the right quality with the right additions, enhancements, and all the things you need, transformations, before you even start building your model, because there's no point to doing that, especially since we're talking about big data. And big data, as you know, is not just about a lot of it, which is the big part, but it's also about big data that's changing a lot, that's in different levels of quality, that's in different levels of issues of speed in terms of how much is changing and all that sort of stuff, different variety as well. It's all these so-called V's of big data. So the methodology deals with that. And then fourth phase, then you could start building your model to the business requirements. And then after that, you can evaluate the model, which is the phase 5, to the business needs as well. And then you can go ahead and push that out, and obviously in very short iterative sprints. So that's what we learned, was that, really starting making data the start of the and core of the whole approach.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, make data core, have a methodology that's data centric, and also follow a methodology, because we've seen far too many organizations. I mean, Ron had talked about rip from the headlines. We wanted to say, this isn't just small organizations. This isn't just organizations that maybe are doing their first AI project that are failing. It's major organizations as well. And that can come from this fundamental lack of following a methodology. And if you're not doing it across the board, then different groups are going to be doing different things. Unfortunately, far too often when we've asked, companies, what are you doing? Either they kind of look at us with like, what are you talking about? Or they say things that are kind of crazy, like they're doing the scientific methodology. And we're like, I don't think you're doing the scientific method for your AI projects. Like, if you really think about it, you're not doing that. So you shouldn't be sharing that. So that's why I think those are some of the major lessons that we've learned.
That's awesome. And just the final question. This has been a really interesting podcast, and I've really actually learned a lot myself now. If any of the listeners would like to listen to the AI Today podcast, which would be the best platforms to stream it on?
Listen to all of them on any of the platforms you like. We're on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Google. We're syndicated everywhere. We're also on our website. You can go to aitoday.live and see all the episodes there. The other thing we have is that we offer a lot of training and certification and courses, especially in the CPMAI methodology, but we have a lot of free stuff. So if you check out, we have an intro to CPMAI. So if you're a project management person, as you all are listening to this podcast, and you've been like, hey, maybe I should think about AI and data. Maybe I'm involved, or maybe I want to expand my career or something like that. We have an intro to CPMAI. It's like a mini course for free. You can check it out, aitoday.live/CPMAI. We even have its own landing page there. Check it out. But as far as listening to the podcast, if we're on a platform that if we're not on a platform that we should be, you should let us know. But we're hopefully on all of them that we could possibly be on.
Exactly. Yeah, we try and make it super accessible so you can listen wherever you like to listen to your podcasts.
That's fantastic. We'll make sure to include all the links in our show notes below. And once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And we'd love to have you again on the podcast in the future.
Yeah, and as I have to mention, we also will be having the folks from Cora on the AI Today podcast. So stay tuned for that. We'll have some news about when that's out, and we'll promote that to all of our channels. We'd love to hear your perspectives on project management as it overlaps with AI as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.